Welcome to the Curmudgeon Cafe podcast. My name is Benjamin Lewis. The goal of the Curmudgeon Cafe is to preserve stories and history on a personal level. Every individual is like a library, and if their stories aren't recorded and documented, they can be lost forever. This week, my father and I sat down with Washboard Willy, a traveling one-man band whose actual name is Larry Hiskett. He travels the world sharing his love of music and rhythm with everyone he meets. I hope you enjoy this interview with Larry Hiskett.
Well, I was born Larry Wayne Hiskett in Pratt, Kansas, many years ago. People often ask me, what was Kansas like? And I said, well, it's a great place to be from, but actually it was a great place to grow up. I grew up in the farmlands, the wheat fields of Kansas, and it was a great place to grow up. I actually grew up about 60 miles north of there in a little town called Ellenwood, Kansas, from about 5th grade on through high school. And people ask me all the time, Washboard Willy, why are you Washboard Willy? Why aren't you Larry, Washboard Larry or something like that? And I said, well, that's because Washboard Larry didn't have that ring to it. But growing up in Kansas, I had a lot of time. I grew up on a farm, and there was a lot of things to do in the country, playing in the wheat fields, playing in the grass, playing in the woods. I had a lot of imagination. I built a lot of things out of wood and nails. And my dad was a welder, and he created a lot of things for me, from playgrounds to a little tractor I drove when I was a little kid. So I had a lot of creativity around me back then. And there were a lot of things that sort of shaped my life, and a big one, of course, was music. I had two wonderful music teachers, one in elementary school and the next one in high school that followed up. And they taught me all my music, my instruments. I went to state competitions through high school. I was in jazz band, I was in the orchestra, I was in the marching band, and I had a great foundation laid down in my life with music. And also had a great foundation in terms of creativity and jack of all trades kind of guy. My dad was like that. I grew up with him in the oil fields of Kansas. He was a pumper. So I had farming on one side, and I worked in the oil fields on the other side. And by the time I got through high school, I decided I didn't want to be a farmer or working in the oil fields. So I went on to junior college, and I worked as a draftsman for my uncle's Schaefer Plow manufacturing company there in Pratt. And I played in bands on the side, and I got through junior college, and I got a drafting job up in Hutchinson, Kansas, about 60 miles away, and lo and behold, I have another band. And I've always had bands in my life. I've always had music in my life. Whether the music was on the front burner or the back burner, music has always been a part of my life. And it has shaped me into what I am today as a full-time musician, washboard player, one-man band. And I kind of owe it to my upbringing. I was always taught to be self-reliant and independent, and often I had to solve my own problems. And being a jack of all trades, and sometimes when you're out in a tractor in the middle of a dusty old field plowing and something breaks down and barbed wire is the only thing you have to get you out of a fix, that's what you do. That was even before duct tape. Now I use a lot of duct tape, and it still gets me out of a lot of fixes. And part of my life has always been designing my life, creating my life, creating the next best thing I could do. If I got bored, I always figured something out. If I got stuck, I sort of figured out how to get unstuck. And I think growing up in the farms and Kansas and having that kind of independent lifestyle sort of shaped me into who I am today. I went on from junior college, and I played in a band, and I went on the road, and I was on the road for about 3 years with the show band. and I got totally burned out, and I went back to Wichita, Kansas, and got a drafting job, and the drafting job wasn't just a drafting job, it was working for a landscape architecture design firm. Next thing you know, I fall in love with landscape architecture. My boss helps me get a school loan, and I go back to college for 4 years and become a landscape architect. Meanwhile, I played my way through college. I worked my way through college. I came out owing very little money in college, and had a landscape design profession that took me overseas to Saudi Arabia, of all places. And so I started traveling around the world and came back, and next thing I know, I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I didn't want to go back to Saudi Arabia, and so I quit the firm and ended up as a landscape architect, park planner for a city of Aurora, and had a band on the side. And I've had lots of bands and lots of music in my life. And one of the things that I guess shapes anyone's life is those turning points in life. Things that you get to a point and you're not sure what direction you're going to go, and all of a sudden something happens and you're set on another path. I guess I've had many turning points in my life, instances in my life that something happened and all of a sudden I'm going another direction. One of the earliest ones I remember was out working in the hayfields in Kansas. I had gotten a brand new pair of boots, a pair of Wellington boots. And I was on the hay wagon, and I was lifting these heavy bales of hay. I'm probably about 11, 12 years old. And I get this bale of hay on over my head, ready to stack it, and the wagon hits a bump and my feet just slide right out from underneath me. Next thing I know, I fall over the side of the wagon, I hit the ground, and air is just, I can't breathe. And I turn and I look, and I see the wheels of the hay wagon coming within about 6 inches of my head. And I turned and looked the other way, and I looked at that tractor, and I said, I'm going to learn to drive that tractor. And I did. And so then later on in life, you have accidents, things that happen, whatever. It's all part of life. It's what shapes you, your path, your journey. I often say it's not the race to the finish, it's the journey. And you never know when it's going to finish. And in my life, I've been given, extra time. I've been given many extra chances. One was over in Saudi Arabia. I almost didn't come out of there alive, but I did. And I got back. I ended up going back, after coming back from Saudi Arabia, I quit the landscape architecture firm I was at, and I didn't want to go back to Saudi, so I stayed in Denver, and I ended up being a park planner for the city of Aurora, Colorado. And I was on a whole nother journey. Then I got married and moved up in the mountains, and eventually had my own business. And during another turning point in my life would be when my final year of college came around as a landscape architect at K-State. I'm working on a summer project in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. I'm there for about 4 months with a buddy and I. We're working on this project together, an open space and outdoor recreation plan for the city of the city of Eureka Springs, sorry. So one Sunday afternoon in the middle of the summer of 1976, I walk into this bar in downtown Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and I see a band playing that's called Cornbread, and there's a guy sitting in with them called Washboard Willy. And I was fascinated by this guy. He had long black hair, and he had overalls, he was barefoot, a big beard, and he was playing this washboard, and he was going to town on this washboard. And I was watching, and as a drummer, as a percussionist all my life, that really fascinated me. And by the end of that afternoon, I said to myself, dang, that looks like fun, and I could do that. And so I filed that in my memory banks way back. So several years later, now I'm park planner in the city of Aurora, Colorado. And I take a lunch break and I go to this Buckingham Square mall, and they have an antique show going on. And I'm walking around looking at all the stuff, and I look down and there's a washboard. And all of a sudden that little light went on in me. And I said, oh yeah, I remember that guy, washboard somebody. And so picked it up and I scratched around on it. It sounded pretty good, so I bought it and stored that in my closet for many years until I moved up in the mountains outside of Evergreen, Colorado. I had some neighbors move in next door and helped them on a wintry April one afternoon, saved his wife from a ditch down at the bottom of the hill, and on the way back up, bringing them back home, we introduced ourselves and come to find out they were a musical duo. And they invited me over for a picking and grinning party, me and my wife, several years later. And I take the washboard over there instead of my drums, and I start scratching around on the washboard, and they're playing banjo and bass and guitar. It's a whole jam going on, and everybody says, wow, that sounds pretty cool. Next thing you know, we form a little band. So I'm a landscape architect working full-time doing that, and then on the side playing in a band. Now I'm playing drums and washboard. Next thing you know, I break through the washboard after a couple months. I go out and find another washboard. I break through it. After a couple washboards, I got frustrated trying to find the one exactly like the original one. So I designed my own. I went down and found a stainless steel shop, and they matched the corrugation on the washboard, and I went to a furniture manufacturer friend of mine, and he made a frame for it, and I designed what I call the Hiskett rhythm board. Don't risk it, get a Hiskett. And that's where it all started. And the next thing you know, I started calling myself Willy Hiskett. And eventually that morphed into Washboard Willy. And it's just been this incredible journey with a washboard of all things, that instead of drums, and there's a lot of drummers out there, I decided I'd try my hand at one more time being a professional musician, but as Washboard Willy instead of Larry Hiskett, the drummer. Eventually I went on to Loveland, Colorado, and had 2 or 3 years there as a park planner, playing on the side. So then I have another turning point. It all started on a Saturday afternoon. The band I had was called Boy Jaime and the Alpine Blasters. It was punk polka, and it was fun. And I played washboard in full lederhosen gear, and we did a lot of rock and roll, and we called it punk polka, polka till you puke. And it was a lot of fun. My girlfriend's brother at the time was our keyboard player, and so we go to this park on an invitation from another band that was playing at this picnic to come and set in for a set and do our Boy Jaime, the Alpine Blaster set. So we go and do the set, we have a great time. Marcia and I go back to my house, and we decided to jump on my Honda Goldwing, and we ride up to Estes Park that Saturday afternoon. It was Labor Day weekend, and go have some fun and go to a Honda rally. So we're heading up Big Thompson Canyon to Estes Park from Loveland, Colorado. We never made it. About 5 miles short, we're turning into a corner, and there's a turnoff for an overview of the Big Thompson River. And because of all the traffic on the Labor Day weekend of people coming on, turning off and getting back on and off and getting back on the road, when I came into that corner, it was like driving on marbles. And our bike just went right out from underneath us. We slid out, went over the bank and down in the Big Thompson River. Well, that was a pretty close call. We both had our helmets on. But when I got drug out and I finally woke up in the ambulance, I asked where Marcia was. And they said, well, she's being flight for life to Fort Collins, Colorado. I said, Fort Collins, what's going on? Well, she broke her back. She fractured her lower lumbar, just below her waist. And to this day is still paralyzed from the waist down. I was beaten up. I was distraught. My whole world came crashing in. 3 days later, I get released from the hospital because there's really nothing physically wrong with me except I'm beaten up and bruised and torn up inside. And another turning point.
This is the point in the program where I'd normally point out how you can help support the show by visiting patreon.com/curmudgeoncafe and pledging your support per episode, or ask you to like the show on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. But today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to recommend another podcast. This other podcast I'm going to recommend is The Historian's Movie Review, where Nathan Pavolko, a history professor, reviews movies based on historical events, and reviews them based on their historical accuracy and the representation of the events and the people involved. You can find the Historian's Movie Review at historianmoviereview.libsyn.com. I'll include a link in the show notes. I hope you'll all take a moment to give it a listen. Thank you for listening, and now back to our interview with Washboard Willy.
So let's fast forward a year later. I'm sitting in the office at the City of Loveland, and I'm working on a computer program, struggling with it, trying to transfer from old school to new school, from working with pen and ink and drawings and drafting to now computer technology, doing all that. And it wasn't easy. There was a lot of frustrations involved. So one day my boss walks up to me and said, "Larry, can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure, Rod, what do you need?" He says, "When do you think you can give 100% back to the City of Loveland?" And I looked at him and I thought to myself, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, you know, I guess I had taken some time off. I had my ups and downs. I had days I woke up after the accident and I didn't even want to get out of bed. I was pretty distraught. I had a lot of grief to deal with Marcia now in a wheelchair and facing the rest of her life in a wheelchair. I'd gone through a couple of operations. The first one didn't set, the second one did, but she was in a lot of pain. And I looked at Rod and I said, "You know, Rod, I think what I need to do is give me 100%. So I gave the City of Loveland a 90-day notice. I should have given them a 90-second notice, because once I made that decision that I was going to leave there, where I was going to go I wasn't sure, but I knew I was going to leave. And instead of being a drummer, I was going to go back into the music business as a washboard player, because I was having more fun playing the washboard than I was working a real job. And my heart just wasn't in the landscape architecture anymore. So I left in October of '88 to pursue this Washboard Willy career. I wasn't Washboard Willy back then, I was still Willy Hiskett, but eventually that changed over to Washboard Willy, and I started playing with some bands and traveling. I ended up in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. I met up with a partner there, David Moran. We started Dobie and Willie, the last of the low-tech troubadours. And next thing you know, we're on our way to Japan. And Dave and I go to Japan for a Colorado ambassador sister state relationship with Yamagata in Colorado. And next thing you know, we're invited back for 6 weeks in the summer of 1990 for a stint at this flower park called Come Come Flower Park, a brand new flower park that was being built. So we opened that up, and then a year later I was invited back and I took a trio. And then a year later I was invited back, and instead of for 6 weeks, they asked me if I'd come for 6 months. Now, think about that. I'm a codependent drummer, a washboard player. And suddenly I've been asked to be a one-man band. I was terrified, but I met the challenge. I put some backing tracks together, and I went over there with a little cassette tape of backing tracks, and they put together a PA for me, and for 6 months I was the gaijin at the Come Flower Park, and people came from all over Japan on vacation that summer, and busloads of tourists, and I would entertain at this Mongolian grill restaurant. Well, halfway through the summer, I basically noticed that on Sundays, the whole family would come, because the Japanese man works 6 days a week in Japan. So Sunday was his only day off. And the families would come with their kids and picnic out on this big lawn outside the restaurant. So I came up with this idea. I said, hey, well, we put a stage out there, the extension cord, a little PA, and I'll play to the picnickers. So we did it. Next thing I noticed as I'm playing to the picnickers, playing the washboard, and I'm out there in my blonde hair and colorful outfits, kids would sort of gravitate towards me. But as soon as I looked them in the eye, wah, they go running off. And so it became a challenge for me. How do I capture the attention of these kids without scaring them? So I had the use of a car, and I'd go to the local music stores, and I gathered up some rhythm instruments, maracas, egg shakers, claves, whatever, jingle sticks. And before each show on a Sunday afternoon, I would sprinkle these instruments around the stage. And I would pretend I didn't even notice the children. And I'd start playing along, and the kids would come up and look at me, and I'd just look over them, not paying any attention to them, because I didn't want to intimidate them. And the next thing you know, a kid would look down, it's like, oh, and he'd pick up a shaker. And another kid would pick up a shaker. And before long, I would have 20 or 30 kids around me, all playing along. And the next thing you know, I'd be doing a little conga line with these kids around their parents and stuff playing. Well, I did that for the last 3 months of my 6-month stay in Japan. And that was I guess you'd call it another turning point in my life. When I got back to Steamboat Springs, I made a decisive decision to become a one-man band. Because now I just did it. So after I got back to Steamboat Springs, about 3 months later, I decided, instead of being, playing in the bars and the nightclubs and the ski resort, that I would be a children's entertainer. It seemed like the logical thing to do, especially after Japan. So I retooled. I went and got more instruments, and I started going to the preschools and elementary schools. I even did some ski lesson things as the kids were getting all dressed up and suited up to go out and do their ski lessons. I would come and entertain the kids, all bundled up in their little snowsuits and things, and kind of take off the apprehension of what they were about ready to do. So after a while, after playing après-ski and preschools and birthday parties and trying to do as many things for the kids I could in the community of Steamboat Springs, it wasn't enough to basically make a living doing that. I was still relying on my landscape architecture skills and my creativity and that line of work to make money. But eventually I moved to Laguna Beach. I met a person and went out there and visited, and I ended up landing in Laguna Beach, of all places, a beautiful coastal community just south of LA. And I started doing some local stuff, playing in local bands and setting in and getting known. And I did a lot of research. I go to the library on a regular basis and just trying to find out what's about the area and what opportunities I could dig up. One afternoon, I'm sitting in the library and I'm looking through this California Book of Associations. And I see old-time fiddlers and different things, and all of a sudden there's this WFA, the Western Fair Association. So I read about it, and it's like, oh, okay. So I take down the information, get the phone number. I go back to the house. I make a phone call. I call the WFA offices. And I get this lady, Connie is her name, and she's saying, I asked about WFA, and I'm an entertainer. She said, well, just so happens the deadline to register for the Western Fair Association conference coming up in January, and this was like end of October, November. She said the deadline to submit all your information to get a showcase was that next Friday, which is like 2 days later. So I asked her about, well, if I got my information to you by Monday, would you accept it? And she said, sure. So I was working at Kinko's at the time. I went down, gathered all my information together, what video I could, and compiled a little promo kit, and I sent it off to Western Fair Association. And I applied for a stage show, because I've been on the stage my whole life as a musician. Well, a couple weeks later, I get a reply. They turned me down. It's like, okay, big deal. I'll go find something else. But then about 3 or 4 days later, I get a phone call from the association service rep. He says, we reviewed your information and what you gave us, and we think you would be a good strolling host as a strolling act at the fair. I said, well, what does that entail? I said, well, you stroll around the fair, you do your show, you stop and put on a show, but you do it just found stage, wherever you could find a place to play on the fairgrounds. I said, well, sign me up. So I got a chance to showcase in 1995 at the WFA as a strolling act. Well, the rest is history. I've been doing fairs and festivals ever since, and it's just been an amazing journey. The Washboard has taken me around the world. I've played in Japan, and Iceland, and England, and Germany, and Norway, and Belgium, and who knows where I'm going to go next. It's been this incredible journey, and it's something I guess I was designed for. When you think about your life and you back up and you think about all the things you've done in your life, all the things you didn't think you wanted to do in your life, but you did, and it all comes together later on in life, following your heart, doing what you love, supporting the passion you have for what you love, whatever it is, and having the creativity to adapt, adjust, modify, design, whatever you need to support that dream. And I guess really that's what this is all about. It's about a dream. When you're a child, you imagine yourself as a firefighter, as a policeman, as a banker, whatever. Your mentors, the adults in your life, the people that you look up to. Those are the people that maybe you want to grow up to be like. I always wanted to be the next Buddy Rich. Now I'm Willie Poor. But it's all about following your heart. And you never know where the next turning point is going to take you. You think you're on a path, and you think that's it. Next thing you know, things change. The only thing permanent in this life is change. And the best thing you could do is find the tools for adapting.
Sometime after we recorded this interview, I asked Larry to share with me a book recommendation for our listeners. He immediately recommended the entire Alex Cross series by James Patterson. I haven't read any of the books in the Alex Cross series, but I may have to give it a listen on audible.com. There you can find over 150,000 audiobooks, and if you go to audibletrial.com/curmudgeon, You can sign up for a free trial of Audible and download one free audiobook of your choice. Washboard Willy recommended one of the books from the Alex Cross series by James Patterson. Thank you. Back to our interview with Washboard Willy.
So who's Penny?
Who's Penny?
Who's Penny?
Who's Penny?
Who's Penny? Tell me about Penny.
Penny, my dog?
Yeah, Penny, your dog.
You want to know about Penny, my dog? I was up in Spokane, Washington, doing a fair. I'm by myself. I have a van, and I'm traveling, doing the circuit now with the Western Fair Association, and traveling up and down the West Coast doing fairs. And I have a lot of equipment, and I'm starting to think, wow, you know, I have a lot of stuff here, and I have no protection. So I go to a pound, and I walk in, and I said, well, you guys have any, I'm looking for a dog. I'm not sure what I'm looking for, but looking for a dog and as a companion. Someone to take along with me since I'm a one-man band traveling all over the western part of the United States. I need a companion and some security. So I go through the pound and I look around, and nothing connects, nothing. And so I'm about ready to walk out the door, give it up, and the lady behind the desk said, well, what are you looking for? I said, well, I'm not sure. I just need, you know, a small dog, something not too big, just a companion, you know, someone to take along with me on the road as Washboard Willy. And she says, well, we have a dog that's in confinement right now, going, you know, just being checked out, but hasn't been released to the pound. Still under observation. Would you want to check her out? I said, sure. So I walked in there, and there's this little metal cage and this little border collie, about 10-month-old border collie, named Penny, came with the name already. She's kind of cowered down in the corner of the cage. And I looked at the lady and said, well, can I take her for a walk or something? She said, sure. So we got a leash and hooked up Penny, and she came bouncing out of the cage like, what can I do? What can I do? So I take her outside for a walk, and man, she's just all over the place and full of life. And where in the cage, she was kind of cowered down. And so after about 10 minutes of working with her outside and walking around, I said, let's do it. So next thing you know, Penny is in my life. And she's a border collie, and she takes a lot of work. And she's very chewy. And I get through those years, and she was a great companion. And eventually, when my wife came along, Penny suddenly was down on the bottom rung of the ladder in our household. And a good friend of mine needed a companion for her daughter. Was thinking about buying a dog, and we were about ready to go on a long journey, and I needed someone to watch Penny, so I let my friend borrow Penny, and they babysat her for about a month while we were gone. And I got back to their house and visit and pick up Penny to go back on the road. Penny didn't want to go, and she really was very adamant about, I want to stay. And you know, in the best interest of that dog, I let Penny stay with that family. She had a big backyard to run in and everything, and was a great companion. And she lived out her last days there. And you know, Penny was one of my best friends, as any dog or a cat can be. And it was a great time I had with Penny, and I had a lot of fun, a lot of fond memories of that dog. And I know she's watching over me right now, thinking about the next thing she can chew on.
So where did the wagon come from? Here.
All right, as a one-man band, you gotta have a band. As a washboard player, it's kind of hard to do all the musical aspects of singing and against a accompaniment So I realized early on I had to make some backing tracks. And so then I go to the Western Fair Association and I auditioned with a suitcase, and I had a wash tub, and I had my washboard. And the suitcase was full of rhythm instruments. So I'd set out in the hallway and I'd put instruments out, and I had the wash tub, and someone would get up and play the wash tub, and I had my little keyboard with my sounds, with the music coming out. I didn't even have a sound system. I just had the keyboard with the music, and I'd play, and I made music, and I got hired to do some fairs. And so that was going to be about 3 or 4 months later, and so I had some time to figure out what I was going to do. How I was actually going to make this happen where I can stroll through a fair and make music and entertain people. So I started out with a Bobby-built wagon, a big old industrial type little wagon. You see a lot of parents and people pulling these big fat tire wagons through markets and flea markets and fairs and festivals, and then carrying their kids. And down in Orange County, at the Orange County Flea Market there at the Orange County Fairgrounds, they had a guy that sold these wagons. So I went and got one, and I put a big old speaker in the front of it, and I had my keyboard in it, and I had a battery, and I did all this industrial looking thing, and I made my first summer through Oregon and California with this industrial wagon. And it worked, but I could play a little bit while I was strolling, but generally, like in my first year at the Oregon State Fair, they had all these places marked where you could stand and play and music and whatever. And I was doing like 6 or 8 shows a day. And I'd go to a spot, I'd plug in if I had an electric outlet, or I'd run the battery power, and I'd do my show for about 20 minutes, and then I'd pick up and I'd move on. Well, next thing I know, I'm trying to get through a Saturday afternoon crowd of people, and I'm pulling my wagon from one spot to the next, and I'm saying, excuse me, washboard coming through. I'd honk the horn, and I'd try to get people's attention, and most people are just not paying attention. And so I finally got an idea, wait a minute. So I turned on some music. I turned on some background music. The music was coming out of my speaker. People would listen and hear, and they'd get out of my way. So now I'm going back and forth to different spots, and some vendor yells out to me, "Hey Willie, why don't you play it? Play something along with that music." It's like, oh. All of a sudden I realized, instead of playing 8 sets and having to stroll from one set to the next set to the next spot and the next spot, I would make one of my sets a strolling set. So I turned on the music, I played the washboard, I sang, and I would just stroll from one spot to the next. Next thing I know, I have some vendors say, "Hey, why don't you come by my booth? You're not coming by my booth. Come down this aisle, come down that aisle." Before long, I became a strolling show. Instead of just stopping and playing, I would roll and stroll through the whole fairgrounds, making music and creating atmosphere. And next thing you know, that's my gig. I created this niche. So I'm at the Oregon State Fair, and I go into the Pioneer Village, and I'm coming in there and playing, and I have a Native American flute song I'm playing, and I'm looking very pioneer-esque, I guess you could say. And I meet this guy named Rob Lewis. And lo and behold, he builds miniature wagons. And we get to talking. He says, "I'd like to build you a wagon." I said, "Well, that's cool. Let's do it." So we got our heads together. And next thing you know, I have this little miniature Conestoga 1/3 scale medicine wagon that he sort of helped me redesign from his little covered wagons that he was making. And my first wagon that was custom designed was that little medicine wagon. And I hard pulled it through the fair, but I had the PA and the battery, and it looked really cool, and that kind of got me started. And then many years, 4 or 5 years later, 6 years later, I take my wagon in to Rob to have some repair done on the wheels and bits and pieces. And he says, Willie, you're wearing the wagon out. I said, wearing the wagon out? It's wearing me out. I'm pulling 200 or 300 pounds here. And I'm, by the end of my season, and it was getting longer and longer and longer as I was getting more bookings. By the time, Christmas rolled around and my off season rolled around, I was tired. My legs hurt, my back hurt, everything hurt. So we get together and he said, he had an idea of sort of a golf cart type of thing, like an old Harley Davidson golf cart type thing. And I'm saying, man, I'd love to be in a golf cart. Then everybody else said, well, no, Willie, you need to have that illusion that you're pulling that wagon, because that's so cool that you're actually pulling that wagon and making this music and having fun with everybody. So we get our heads together, and next thing you know, he comes up with this idea of some big old clothespins and getting the washboard material. We got that from Columbus Washboard Company, so we pull all the equipment together, and I send him a speaker that would basically be the radiator of this little truck. And next thing I know, he's starting to build some pieces around this and that, and so that later in the fall, I show up here in Hillsboro, Oregon, right here at this general store in Orinco, and in about 2 months we finished this project, and now is Rocco my custom car, jalopy, whatever you want to call it. It's my rhythm truck. And that was a collaboration of Rob and his incredible mastery of wood. Not so much the welding, but he's a great wood crafter. And I had to have the frame re-welded a couple of times, but we put this thing together. We found a wheelchair accessory place that had an old wheelchair that we got parts of, and we got the motors and the controller, and my gosh, we adapted that to the power system of my truck. And in about 2 months, we finished this thing up, and I went on the road. And I'll never forget, I'm down in San Diego. I'm about ready to do my first harvest festival in the springtime. And I unload Rocco, my little custom truck, brand new. And I'm finishing putting some touches on it and stuff. And I get the battery all hooked up and everything. And all of a sudden it hits me. I sent him this speaker. It's the only speaker I could find that was square. And I got it from Fender. I ordered it online. I had it drop shipped to him. He built the whole thing around that speaker, and with the whole frame and everything came from that speaker, and the housing, our PA, and now I've got this whole truck, and I never even tested out the speaker. I have no clue if this thing is going to sound good or not. And all of a sudden I'm getting anxious. I get this anxiety attack. It's like, oh my God, this is it. I turn it on. I turn everything on. Everything's working. And I start talking through my microphones. Hallelujah, it works. So now what's the next chapter in my life? Well, interestingly enough, I have a new musical partner, Lloyd Mabry. And we have the Lloyd and Willy Show. And it's musical comedy. Lloyd plays 12-string guitar. I play the washboard. I even added some bass, 2 pedals that I stand up and play off my heels. So we sound like a 3 or 4 piece band with just 2 people. And we are having fun, and I can now fly with that and go all over the United States and doing private parties and fairs and festivals. And so that's one of the next new best things I'm doing right now. I'm also looking at, I'm always designing. I'm working on electronics, mixing the high tech with the low tech to give them heck. Because it's all about, with the age of electronics now, and batteries and whatever. It's all about trying to be more compact and more, versatile, be able to get around. I have a flying unit now. Instead of Rocco, my little rhythm truck or my rhythm jalopy, that's 750 pounds. I now have a little portable speaker and battery all enclosed, and Rob designed me a little undercarriage. I put a wash tub, screw it down, and I lock in the speaker in the wash tub, and I put a little gator hamper on top of it, and I pull that around almost like I did in the early days, but I can fly with that now, and so that's opening up new opportunities. Going to go to the great state of Alaska and do the Alaska State Fair in 2015. And now with this, I can virtually go around the world again. I've actually been invited to Singapore here recently to do some work. And so, the thing about creativity is you never know where it's going to lead you. When you create something, you create the energy that gets involved in that. And it's all energy. So the best thing I could say about my future is it's going to change, but it's going to be fun because I'm doing what I love and I'm following my heart, and it's the passion I have for the music and the rhythm. I guess maybe I might even be a mentor at some point, maybe getting involved in the education again. I have schools and libraries and nursing homes coming up to me all the time. Can I have your card? And then they see I'm from out of town, I've flown in or I've driven in from a great distance, and they say, oh, you're not local. I said, no, I'm sorry. But I think at some point in my life, I'll be getting off the road and probably getting in more education and mentoring and creating and designing new stuff. Because that's really, I guess that's the best part of what I do, is the designing part. Coming up with an idea, writing a song. I love writing songs. I'm doing more of that now too, creating more songs. I'm going to a Watermelon Thump here in Luling, Texas, and I've just written a Watermelon Thump song. So I never know where the impetus for creating something is going to come from, whether it's going to be a song or designing a piece of equipment or redesigning something to fit within my confines of my job description as Washboard Willy, a one-man band. But whatever it is, it's going to be fun. So I guess in order to sum up my life, it's not over yet. I never know what the next journey is going to take me, where it's going to take me. I've got new things going on with partners, and I play with bands, and I enjoy playing the washboard more than anything, I guess, because it is my passion, it's my love. But I never would have dreamed I would be a one-man band as a washboard player when I was young. I had other dreams, like every child. We all have dreams. And based on our education, our ability to learn, our ability to seek out what we don't know, to try new things, try different things, that's what basically makes us who we are. This is a creative world we live in. Look around you. All this, everything that man has made has started somewhere up here as an idea. This, it started as a fun thing to do. Next thing you know, I've created my job. Being a one-man band, going around the world, children's entertainer, an interactive playground for kids to join in and play along and be part of my show, sometimes the best part. That's something that just has evolved. And that's what you do in life. You look at the things around you, and if it doesn't suit you, you change it. You change it to suit you, to fit you. What you want to do, what you want to be, it's all up there. So go for it. Go out there and do some cool things. Do some things no one else has ever done. And start with your imagination. You have to research a little bit, find out about things that maybe you don't know about, and then you create. You create your life. Enjoy.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Washboard Willy, aka Larry Hiskett. You can find out more information about the Curmudgeon Cafe podcast at curmudgeoncafe.net. And if you'd like to show your support for the podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we post clips from our upcoming episodes. Thank you, and I hope to see you next week.